Mr. President and members, though we had a lot of work to do today, but I'd be remiss if I didn't stand here today in remembrance of George Floyd. I know how many of you feel about George Floyd, and that's okay. The fact is that I think we have to just kind of think about what's happened over this past year. 1 year today, killed by a police officer in Minnesota. I stand for a Texas native son, George Floyd. On this very day in 2020, passing of 8 minutes and 46 seconds lost his life. That number and those images are etched in our minds, our children's minds, forever. You know, as I woke today, I uttered a prayer for his family, every member of this body, my family. As it relates to his family, many of whom have been gathered in Minnesota today for the most of the week to commemorate his life on his 1 year anniversary. I'm reminded of words about why no bill in the name of George Floyd, because of his past. I say this to each and every one of us. He is without sin, let him cast the first stone. Yes, he had some troubling moments in his life, but I think all of us would agree he did not deserve to die the way he died. You know, as a father, I ache for his daughter. He's been fatherless now for some 365 days. Our Heavenly Father, frankly, stands in the gap. Thought for his fiancée who will never realize growing old with him. Those close grieve, yet I and many in this room, this capital, this state, our nation, and the world have been unable to breathe during and after Mr. Floyd's death. Guilty verdict. The case cannot be called a victory. It should not be called a victory. On the day it was rendered, nor today's 1 year anniversary, because George Floyd is dead. He's dead. He marked 1 year since the 46-year-old Houston native, his life was ended over a store operator's call to police claiming that he passed a fake $20 bill. Let that sink in. Claiming that he passed a fake $20 bill. What have we learned over this past year? Is this country any closer to solving these issues? Our streets, where millions of people across the world protested his death. Yes, there was some vandalism, which all of us condemn, not have occurred. We're living in a country that's more polarized than ever. Will we leave generations problems that we should, our generation, generations in this chamber should be solving? That a minor age witness's cell phone recorded a grossly 9 minutes and 29 seconds that sparked outrage that frankly spread worldwide. You know, think about Floyd's death, Michael Ramos, and others. Ask yourself, Breonna Taylor, we're a mistake. We're a mistake was made. Tatiana Jefferson in Fort Worth, where a mistake made. It's ironically that most of the mistakes that have been made by police officers have been associated with the death. Let me put a plug in it for a minute. I think George Floyd would want me to do this. I'm not saying that our law enforcement, most of them are bad, because that's not the case. If I pick up a telephone and I have a problem, I want to call a police officer. But members, we need more transparency. I can tell you, Senator Woodbine, I can tell you also, when I passed the first dash camera bill here in Texas, I was called by law enforcement, everything except a child of God. Say that again, and you know what I mean. And frankly, I was trying to pass the bill for them. I was called, Senator Betancourt, everything except a child of God, which I am. Members, George Floyd's death has changed this world. Not afraid to speak his name. I'll add it to measures that will continue to be filed, debated, and eventually passed that will right wrongs. I'm just hoping that you can find it in your heart. And probably all of us will come back to do some soul searching during the interim concerning what's going on in this world, in Texas. Recognizing that a native son now is the poster child, if you will. You want to put a face on it? Someone that was murdered by a police officer that abused his power. Had not that young child videotaped that, may be a different story altogether. In closing, it would be different if this was just an isolated case. Last week, on television, a young man by the name of Ronald Green in Louisiana died. You know, after a police chase, crashed his truck into a vehicle, I should say, into a tree. According, this is media reports now. I understand the media may not get it all right, but in the media report, he crashed his vehicle into a tree. Mind you, this was over 2 years ago. It took over 2 years for the videotape to be released. In the police report, Senator Huffman, a government document, it's reported that the officers said that he died as a result of crashing into the tree. It's a government document. Here in Texas, if you falsify a government document, it's a felony. But in this instance, once they got the body camera footage, after 2.5 years, it showed that he was tasered in the car several times, pulled out of the car, face down, handcuffed, tasered, screaming that he's afraid. Legs were shackled. He was drugged by a police officer, face down. Let that sink in. Officer took the chains and just started dragging him. Yet and still, the police report said he died as a result of his vehicle crashing into the tree. Why do I tell you about that? I know that all of you would agree that is despicable. Assuming that all of the facts come out and verify that. George Floyd, a native son of Texas, died, was killed. And I'm hoping that we, as a generation of leaders in this state, won't pass these issues on to another generation of Texans. That we take the responsibility. Yes, Senator Hughes, we don't want one race to think they're superior over another. That's just part of the job that the State Board of Education should be doing. The other part is trying to help us find ways in order to make certain that racism, the ugly face of racism, is no longer welcomed, state, or tolerated, more importantly, in this state. So on behalf of the George Floyd family, I just want to stop just a few minutes, Mr. President, to ask that we adjourn in honor of George Floyd.